Stand by. Do not adjust your set.
All right, how about now? There we are.
All right,
okay, perfect.
there. All right.
Hello and welcome to the rocky start of the first Titterpig Academy stream. We're going to be talking about how to get into tabletop role-playing games and some different terminology to help you out if you're new to the hobby. My name is Peng. I am the headmistress of Titterpig Academy, so I press the button to make the Discord server happen and therefore have the most responsibility for reasons. I've been playing TTRPGs for around 12 years, and I, just really wanted to share my love of the hobby and sort of demystify that learning new TTRPGs is actually not that hard. So I am joined here today with three lovely professors from the Academy. Normally I would say ladies first, but we don't have any ladies. Instead, the closest thing we have is a being of pure chaos, Nerdy. So why don't you introduce yourself?
I was like, that's true. I'm not a lady. Hi.
You're not a lady. You use she, her pronouns. That doesn't make you a lady.
Exactly. Hi, as you heard, I'm Nerdy. I go by the Creative Arts Director because that's a title that I use to excuse being late to classes and yelling at people and throwing things at them during my classes, scheduled things or whatever. I don't know. I'm mostly a designer. I just started getting back into making music though, so like my RPG design stuff has gone down to like 2%, and everything else has gone up to like 70%, as much as 70% is me is able to exist in it anyway. Yeah. That's it. Victor, you go.
Hi.
Victor Hugo.
Victor Hugo is not my name. The first half is right. I am the self-styled chair of the Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark department. Because that's what I run and like to run and talk about incessantly. I played a bunch of role-playing games in college, fell out, and then when COVID happened, I needed a way to talk to people, and so I got back into role-playing games, and now I have too many.
That's not a real thing.
That's not a real thing.
That's not real. You know it.
My Airtable database listing all the PDFs I own begs to disagree.
No, you have a database. You might
talk
have too
about
much
it.
if
We
you
know what they
didn't
are.
have a database, but you organized it, so now you can find them all. All right, go ahead, Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam. I've been playing TTRPGs for a crazy long time. I did the math today, and it's 38 years I've been
Holy
playing
shit.
TTRPGs. I'm
That's my age.
yeah,
That's older than me.
yeah. So
I
that's
also am younger than that.
I'm
people
the
even
old man of
time
the
in the
group.
linear progression of it.
my goal is to be the impish old man of the group. However, right? Like
Woo.
you know what I mean? The troublemaker old guy. So I used to design a lot of stuff for Dungeon Crawl Classics, RPG. I haven't in a far too long. So that's where a lot of my creative energies went. And I don't know, like I'm thrilled to be here in the Titterpig Academy. I like to think of myself, and I haven't really done anything about this so far, but I've been like to have thought of myself as the chair of the philosophy and game history department, because those are clearly the same thing.
Literally the same. There's no difference.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that. We will have to do a game history stream at some point.
I got you covered.
I love game history.
I love game
Slide
history
one.
too, and of course I wasn't alive for a good chunk of it, so I'd like somebody that actually played those games on the stream. All right, well, first I guess we should tell people what is a role-playing game. If for some reason they're here and they don't know that, we should give them a quick definition.
Walking by the lecture hall, just being like, "Oh, what's this about?"
what is a role-playing game? Who wants to tell us about a role-playing game and what that actually means?
Oh, don't. It's a game in which you play a role.
That could be any game.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's the entire definition. That's all you need to know. No, my favorite. It's not exactly this, but Scene 4, aka Sean, famous for being on TikTok, really great dude, has a really great definition of like what it means to what a role-playing game is, which I'm gonna get it wrong, but it's something along the lines of making important decisions in imaginary landscapes, sort of like that situation.
I like
That's
that a
good.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I've
for the people who want a less philosophical approach, you sit around a table or a virtual table and you tell stories with your friends, and there's usually dice rolling or some other randomization mechanic to make the story a little bit more unpredictable in unpredictable moments. So it's a lot of fun. It's why we're all here. We're a bunch of nerds. But, you know, thank you for joining us, and we hope you learned something today. Yeah, so we're all into this hobby, and we kind of all know like a lot of the lingo and all that stuff. But I think when you're coming into the hobby, it's really hard to grasp that. Like, there's a lot of terminology. There's a lot of acronyms that go out there. So one of the things I wanted to start with is like some of the terms like rules-lite and crunchy and what those mean.
Yeah, I mean, like rules-lite is self-explanatory, right? It's just like the sheer number of rules you have to know or learn or understand to play the game. And it's like it's a spectrum from like one-page games like Honey Heist up into like tomes like you know, Rifts or Dungeons and Dragons,
Hero,
right?
freaking Hero. Oh,
Hero, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Hero
gosh, no,
systems.
never.
People definitely have opinions on which they like, but this falls into the no wrong answer category, right? Like of you know, play the game you want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, there's a huge range in there. And there's also different ways that those rules manifest themselves. Like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, the majority of the rules are for the combat, right? Because it comes from like a wargaming background. So there's just a ton of. Oh, go ahead.
That kind of gets to the old debate of, are games about what they have rules for, right? Which, you know, that is a perennial chestnut that kind of wraps its, you know, tendrils around this conversation too.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of today, games are about whatever you want them to be about, but we can tell you what they do, because that's a whole nother
game philosophy stream. We'll talk about
so
that.
there's a whole like game design and game philosophy stream. We could get into that stuff. I would love it, but I think the people here with us today
constantly.
Yeah.
The other term you're hearing thrown around in this context is crunchy, right? Like a crunchy game. So I tend to think of as a crunchy game both as a game with a lot of rules, but also a game with a lot of moving parts, right? So if you have a game where there's a lot of resources you have to track, there's a lot of stuff you have to look up on tables. You know, your character sheet is dense and has lots of numbers on it. That's going to be a crunchier game than a game where your character sheet is just write a paragraph describing your character, and that's, you know, your character sheet.
I'm coming up with like a really abstract way to talk about it that I don't think is going to help us here. But, you know, like, I mean, crunchy games kind of rely that you interact with the game rules and the game elements.
Yeah.
I feel often more than, you know, less crunchy, or as we often say, rules-lite games. I think as well, a major like split is what the rules actually do, right? Like, a lot of traditional games, traditional RPGs, the games are like a physics engine, right? They tell you, does the thing happen? And in a lot of cases, that's a binary yes or no. And on the opposite, which I don't necessarily think of as opposite, but as a complementary side to that, would be more narrative-driven games, where the rules of the game, you know, decide what narratively should happen next. And I know everybody here is a big fan of those.
We've got some fans of those in here for sure. I love me a good narrative game. It's like what I like about it personally is like it makes it feel like the game we're playing is playing out like it would be a TV show or a movie or something like that. And that's like, I really like that kind of play. Obviously, it is not for everyone. Otherwise, people wouldn't still be playing those other games. But people definitely like the more simulationist style games. You know, there's a lot of like GURPS players out there, and GURPS is like the most simulationist game that I can think of. It's got rules for literally every situation.
I think it really.
Oh,
I think
you might have seen the video where I talked about this thing. This is the Traveler 5. This thing is, first off, gigantic, and this has rules for everything, and it is a mess.
Like so it's like a hard sci-fi game from what I know of
Oh
Traveler.
yeah, super
So,
hard,
yeah.
super hard sci-fi. Like this is Asimov the RPG.
I think that like task-based versus narrative-based thing also comes down to like what you as the player want out of the story. So if you want to collaboratively tell a story with your friends, more narrative-based systems are going to make sense. Games like Blades in the Dark have a like real writer's room mentality where all of the players are also authors of the story. But if you want to like live in your character and only know the things your character knows and only be able to make decisions based on that information, then a task-based game makes a lot more sense, because you're not also trying to tell the larger story. You're just experiencing what your character experiences in that moment.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a very good point. If you're trying to live in the game world and see what you can accomplish within this fictional world, like, you want a game that's going to emulate that, that's going to like accurately portray your skills. Whereas like in narrative-based games, a lot of times it's not just what your character is good at that determines whether or not you succeed, but it can also be like, why are you doing the thing and how are you doing the thing that you're doing? Because you know, from a narrative perspective, those things matter, because like when you're approaching it as if like you're a TV show or something, a character's motivations manifest within the narrative to make the character more powerful, essentially, and a lot of narrative games will reflect that.
So I guess the stream. This is intro to RPGs, not how to get introduced to RPGs.
Yeah,
That's a different thing. For some reason, my brain was really caught up in how this was like, how do you get into new RPGs?
no. This is an introduction just to the hobby in general.
Great. I apologize. I've been operating under false assumptions this whole time.
That is, yeah.
Hey, that happens.
We're organized over here. It's fine. We know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Something actually I want to comment about the like to circle back on the like idea of like the different terms of like rules-lite and crunchy. I actually think it's important to distinguish that those two are like two different values and they can apply to the same game.
Yes.
It tends to be that crunchy games are more rules heavy, because when you start designing mechanisms for things, you're like, well, I should make more mechanisms for this, and that's where you get into like the trad, which stands for traditional, which is more of like the game concept of like typically your original D&D is like a trad kind of game, I shouldn't say original D&D, I should say D&D in general as a concept, especially in the more recent editions, is more of a trad game where it's trying to give you a lot of stuff to work with, and it's trying to be more in that simulationist kind of vibe.
I know
Sorry,
a lot of people. I know a lot of people, both people I know in person and people who I follow on TikTok, who play Dungeons and Dragons as a narrative game, right? Like, some of the hallmarks of a narrative game are the idea that you can succeed at the task, but that's actually bad, right? So if you fail your lock-picking roll in a narrative game, you might succeed at picking the lock, only to find guards on the other side of the door, right? You succeeded at the task, but failed in the narrative. And I know
that's
plenty.
how I run every game. Like, it doesn't have to be a narrative game for me to run. Like, I run Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness like that. Like,
Right, exactly.
Every game can be run that way.
Right. It's just the what does the game have like mechanics that encourage that
That's right.
behavior of play or not is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. In a lot of games, that's just like a GM style thing, a choice that the game master is making. But in other games, that's like just built into the actual game mechanics of like, okay, you failed your attempt. Here are some of the scenarios that could come from that. Of like, well, actually, you succeeded at what you wanted to do, but here's a complication around it. And there are other games still which allow you to just succeed with complications. That's just a result of the die roll.
So I would say more like in a lot of cases, like approaching a game from a narrative mindset is an approach, right? Like an approach you can take, and you know, some games you are definitely encourage you to do that. But I've seen people completely miss the mark with those before as well, right? Like, you know, getting a narrative game, you know, for lack of a, I don't want to say wrong, that's not right, but you know, like missing the point of it. You know what I mean?
Just before the stream started, Victor was telling us about someone who was trying to play Avatar Legends in a very deadly combat focused game, and it's like the mechanics of the game just don't support that.
Right, Avatar Legends is very much set up to like match the genre of the television show, right? Like it's a game where like people don't die, you know, and that somebody's going to get upset or hurt because they lost a fight, but they're not going to die because it's a kid show of role playing games, right? And this person was confused why there was no hit points.
I feel like always that's definitely like they're not thinking about those two different, like what you just laid out of like why these games are different and why just like simple mechanical changes make for a different feeling game entirely, which I'm not going to get into like too deep with that because obviously that's not what this is about. But I think that's also a good way to highlight how like these categories that we use generalize for getting a certain vibe across, whereas like it's very unlikely in a narrative game that your character is going to just get killed randomly and you're just going to be like, all right, go make a new character. It's going to probably be because of like it makes sense why my character died. You feel like your character should have died there. I said this to like Victor, where I said like the separation of story games and OSR revolving around death is that like OSR is, should my character have died there? Like, did it make like logically should my character have died there, regardless of what the narrative cares about? And then story games is like, should my character have died there emotionally? What makes the most sense?
Yeah. So I'm gonna take a minute to interject here. You did mention the OSR, but we haven't actually talked about what OSR games are.
I was just about to. I was just about to say that too.
Yeah. So we should probably, if someone wants to go ahead and explain what an OSR game is and what OSR means, because it is definitely an acronym that gets thrown around a lot, but not necessarily.
I'm also curious.
So the.
Go ahead.
Adam, you go ahead. You probably know more than me anyways.
Well, I wish I could show around my camera, but that's like this wall and several shelves here. So OSR, Old School Renaissance. If you say it means anything else, you're wrong.
That's a really
canceled.
Yeah, I disagree, and there's a reason I disagree. But anyway, I can get to that. But what OSR means as Old School Renaissance is they're games that often emulate an earlier period in gaming history. Like a real common example right now is Old School Essentials. Old School Essentials emulates 1981's BX Dungeons and Dragons rules, which are the greatest Dungeons and Dragons rules ever published.
Oh no. I can't say anything.
But there's everything from like Osric, which emulates first edition AD&D. There's Labyrinth Lords is another BX clone. Swords and Wizardry is about to be cool again, and that's OD&D. There are even games that aren't Dungeons and Dragons that are still OSR games. Things like, what's the Chill? Somebody did a retro clone of Chill. But in general, it's also moved out into just basically meaning rules-lite, typically more traditional style games that kind of emulate a particular vibe. Rulings, not rules, is a big it's one of the mantras behind the OSR. That comes from Matt Finch, who's the guy who wrote Swords and Wizardry, along with Osric. So he's the guy you have to blame for a lot of this stuff. But where emphasis is really placed on player skill rather than character ability, right? That's what you care about in an OSR game is how good are we thinking through this stuff, right? And that's why the comment about does it make sense for me to have died there? Really, that you're right. It has the holy grail for an OSR gamer is a logical cohesion to a lot of stuff, in addition to the rules not getting in the way of
the best single sentence description I've heard of OSR is it's like an old point and click adventure game like Monkey Island, except you can click on anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you're in a dungeon, the DM describes a locked door blocking your way or ancient ruins on the wall, and then you just have a back and forth of asking more and more questions about what's in the room until you come up with a plan. And if your plan is smart enough, it works.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the OSR games is, to me, somebody who hasn't played a lot of them, it very much feels like your goal is to not interact with the mechanics. Your goal is to find out as much information as possible, get a very good plan,
yes,
and then hopefully never have to roll, because every time you roll, you might die.
The mechanics kill you.
Right,
the mechanics are there to kill you most of the time.
So Michael in the Improv GM in the in the chat is asking about the retro clone to Chill. Yes, it's called Crypt World. It's published by Goblinoid Games. It's decent. It's chill. If you've played Chill, you know what to expect. It's all right.
What? In 2 sentences or less, what's Chill?
Okay, so Chill in a lot of ways was one of the first non-Cthulhu based horror games.
Okay.
It's more today it kind of fills the same niche that Monster of the Week does. But it's an OSR style game, right?
Cool.
So it's kind of traditional monsters and mummies and Draculas and Frankensteins, right?
I gotcha.
But it fills that kind of niche.
Nice.
Okay, cool. You mentioned Monster of the Week, and I think that gives us another good pivot point into what Powered by the Apocalypse games are, because Monster of the Week is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and I'm just going to let Victor talk for a while here. If Mo was here,
okay.
I would let them do it, but Mo is not here with us. Well, Mo was here with us in the chat, but they're.
I guess it does say this is I am chair of the department. I did kind of set myself up for that. So Powered by the Apocalypse, so the technical and kind of useless definition just means any game where the author of the game says I was inspired by Apocalypse World. Which is true, but also not really helpful for this conversation. So they are more narrative games, the games where the role doesn't care if the task succeeds or fails. It's roles where when you roll the dice to determine who gets to narrate the result. On a success, the player gets to say what happens. They get what they want. On the failure, the GM gets to add a complication or a cost. And then usually in PBTA games, there's a mixed success as well, where the player gets what they want, but the GM gets to add on some kind of cost or consequence. And it's really that mixed success that is the engine that drives the story forward. It is a play to find out is the other mantra you frequently hear associated with PBTA games. And so you will have some kind of starting incident, an inciting situation, and an inciting incident. And then because every time you roll a failure or a mixed success, the GM adds something to the story. The GM adds some complication or problem to overcome. As you roll dice, that just initial situation gets more and more complex, and the story spirals out from there. Monster of the Week.
Crab has just asked, what does PBTA mean? It means powered by the apocalypse.
PBTA means powered by the
Which
apocalypse.
we
I
said
spoke
powered by
too
the
fast.
apocalypse, but then we never said
Yes.
PBTA
Yeah,
means
we
that, so
never
I
specified.
appreciate
Yes.
the question.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Crab. Monster of the Week is one of the old school... Yes, please be an anarchist. God, I'm going to go write a PBTA game called Please Be the Anarchist.
I would
and
play
just-
it.
I'm currently
just to
writing a
confuse
game
people.
called The Anarchist Guide to Time Travel.
So Monster of the Week was one of the earlier PBTA games, and it's inspired by Buffy, Angel, Supernatural, X-Files, any show where there is every episode a monster of the week that you have to go and fight, and then over the course of multiple monsters of the week, you get some kind of season arc or some kind of story arc. They're all tied together somehow. It's eventually revealed. Did I hit questions on? You're usually, but not always, rolling 2d6 and adding a modifier to it. That's the last little snippet.
Did you touch on playbooks? I guess we can touch
Yeah.
on characters in general, but we can start at PBTA playbooks.
Yeah, totally. So in most PBTA games, PBTA is like, again, to be technical, a design philosophy, not a system, which is why I say most PBTA games, because not all of them have this, but most PBTA games have playbooks instead of character classes. And so your character and class in D&D generally says what your character can do, right? Like, bards sing to inspire people, wizards cast magic. Your playbook in most PBTA games defines who your character is. So there's only ever going to be one of each playbook in your campaign, because it would be weird to have two... I don't have a good example handy, but in Avatar, there's the successor, who is a successor to a family fortune or a family authority. And it would be weird to have two of that same story type, that same archetype in one campaign. So your playbook tells you what your character's story is going to be about in very broad terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on it in a little bit, but a lot of times in less narrative-focused games, especially, characters are defined by what they're capable of. And in games like D&D, obviously, they are built on like your ancestry and your character class. And that kind of defines what your character's abilities are. And also you have a level, so you level up like in big discrete steps, but of course not all games do that. There's a lot of different ways to build a character.
That's a good transition point, because there's advancement is also like a key aspect of RPGs, right?
Can I stay on PBTA for one more second? Actually, we got
Go
a
for
question.
it. Yeah.
We got a question. Somebody in chat asked what the
Thank
difference
goodness.
between. So they asked what the difference between Forged in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse is. So Forged in the Dark is any game that is inspired by Blades in the Dark, which is a great game. So really, the difference is like there are mechanical differences, right? So they just use different kinds of die rolls, generally speaking. PBTA games tend to be about your individual's character's story in the world and how your story intersects with other characters, right? And there's less... This is not universally true, but there's less like party cohesion in a PBTA game. You're all in the same story, but you're like an ensemble cast in that story. Most Forged in the Dark games are, you are a crew, you are a gang, you are all on a mission together, and so it's very much you and your companions against the world, whatever world that may be. It depends on the Forged in the Dark game. So Forged in the Dark games are much more team-based, and your whole team is focused on a goal.
No,
All right.
that's great.
Sorry to interrupt,
I didn't
Adam.
want to. I'm sorry for derailing your train, but you got right back on the tracks. So well done.
Choo-choo.
Advancement is a key feature of a lot of RPGs. You know, not everyone. I mean, Kingdom likes has no advancement, and that's a thing. A lot of traditional games do use an experience point system, and that goes one of two ways. Either you accrue enough experience points where you crest into a new level, right, and you get new benefits associated with that, or you accrue experience points to spend on skills or other features like that to advance your character. On top of that, you want to talk, Victor? You want to pass it back to you? Talk about PBTA style advancement.
Yeah, totally. So I think, more traditional games or games that are like simulationist or task based, like Adam said, you're getting XP usually based on like challenges overcome, right? So like the classic example is in D&D, you defeat the monsters, you get XP, or in old
take the treasure.
You take the treasure, right? In OSR, you take the treasure, you get XP. More narrative games and powered by the apocalypse games tend to be, did you make progress in the story, or did you learn something about your character? Like, did your character evolve? So this is like Avatar again, because that's what I've been playing a lot of recently. The growth triggers, they're called, are stuff like, for one playbook, the growth trigger is, did you apologize to someone you had wronged, right? And if you do that, you get XP. And that's not about overcoming monsters or a challenge or getting treasure. It's very much like a personal growth of the character.
There's another style of advancement that you can see in some narrative games and some traditional games. This is the style that's used in Call of Cthulhu. It's also what's used in Burning Wheel derivatives like Torchbearer and Mouseguard, where when you use skills,
Yes.
They have a chance of improvement. And RuneQuest, I believe, original RuneQuest does this.
It does, yes.
Yeah. That's a system I like a lot because it feels like you get better at doing the things that, that you're doing, right? So it feels like you're being rewarded for, using the things that you have or developing new things or something like that. And a lot of those games as well, they'll have they'll have different sets of rewards, for narrative narrative developments like Victor was talking about with the PBTA games. Like, for example, again, in Torchbearer, there's like different types there's fate and persona points that you need to get, as the game moves forward, but you're only awarded that for doing things in story, not just rolling dice well.
Yeah.
Or poorly.
Yeah, a lot of games do reward you with experience for rolling poorly, which I very much like because something bad happened to you, but you got XP out of it. It makes it feel a lot better.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I really like about the Torchbearer, the Burning Wheel system, is that in order to level up the skills, you have to get successes and failures, right? And that just makes sense. I learn way more when failing than doing something right.
Right. But if you never do it right, you're probably not learning that much. So
all you ever do is do it right. You're just practicing. That's it. It's nothing. You're not doing anything. You got to be able to fail.
I personally continuously throw myself into dangerous situations so that I can get better at fighting things. And, I die and then somebody brings me back to life and I just get better at fighting. That's how that works.
Yeah.
Like in real life.
Yeah.
I see
in
what
real
you're
life.
talking about.
Yeah.
That's, that checks
I
out.
only fail.
So you've learned a lot, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
That's great.
Man, college is weird.
Yeah. Weird courses. No, I actually wanted to comment on this isn't PBTA related, so if you want to stop me from derailing, please do.
No, go for it. We're on character advancement now.
Related to the advancement thing, one of my favorite games, the one that I say is my favorite, but isn't actually my favorite because it's awkward to talk about my favorite, is not for any bad reasons, just because it's hard.
This is
to
how we found out Nerdy's favorite is Fatal.
Oh God, no!
No, it's a Jenna Moran. It has to be a Jenna Moran game, right?
Yeah, it is. That's why it's awkward to talk about because I'm like, yeah, my favorite game is. Oh fuck, I should say something else.
I should play a game people actually know how to play.
Exactly.
But
I didn't hear what it was.
I'm not saying it right now.
Okay.
The one I say is my favorite is Roll for Shoes because
Yeah.
it's a very rules-light system, and I love running it. I tried to run it a couple times here. I was actually the first game we ran on the server because I think it's one of the easiest things to introduce to somebody, no matter what games they've played, even if they've played no games. Because I've had people show up who've literally only heard of the concept and they immediately got it because it just gets you into a mindset. But its advancement system is very interesting in that it also has XP for failure, but it also gives you where if you roll all sixes, because it uses only d6s or six-sided dice to play, if you roll all sixes on a roll, you get a new skill related to the thing you were just doing. And the cool thing about that is that you can also advance on a skill when you roll, like if you rolled a single die and you were trying to like disassemble an atom or whatever, or like you were trying to build like a bomb, let's say, whatever, right? And you're like, literally the first thing you try to do is make a bomb. And obviously your character doesn't know what they're doing because you start with no skills. And you get a 6. You could then get a skill, and I'm like, I roll 4 dice on that because there's no possible way you're going to be able to get this without being really lucky. And I still beat you, but you get a 6, so you get a new skill. And so it encourages players to like do things no matter how terribly unoptimal of a choice that is. And so you naturally end up with this, what I always say is like, it's like if it's the RPG for if you want to play like Three Stooges or Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton kind of situations, because you're just kind of just doing stuff and things happen, and there is no technical, like mechanical way that your character can die, so you can Mr. Magoo your way through an entire adventure and get to the end, and then you end up with this weird looking character sheet with a bunch of funny named skills that kind of describe what happened throughout the session. And then it's really fun to share with your friends and stuff like that. But I like it because it just naturally pushes the players to be like, you know what? I am gonna roll to put on my pants because I might get a new skill out of it, or at the worst, I get
Pants
an XP point.
punning.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why the game is called what it is, because the full name is, I'm sorry, or not sorry, I almost renamed the game, is I roll to see if I have shoes on, which is shortened down to Roll for Shoes.
Crab asks, how are TTRPGs different from board games? Well,
Can I give an answer? I have an answer.
you sound very excited. Go ahead.
I have because I have a very nerdy answer that I think Crab will appreciate this. So, the only difference in my mind is that when you play a role-playing game, you are making decisions as another person.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So if you play Settlers of Catan, pretending to be Lord Ellard, who is settling these islands in the name of his kingdom, then you are playing a role-playing game.
I actually agree with that assessment 100%.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping you from role playing in a board game, right?
So a number of years
Exactly.
ago, the guy who designed 7C, his name is John Wick. He
The other John Wick, for the record.
don't get them confused. If you see them, it's impossible to get them confused. But he made this this is why I'm not a fan of his. Is he made this statement that if D&D is a role-playing game, then so is chess. And here's, I think, Victor's thought here. Instead, to me, says this is how you can make chess a role-playing game, and I think that that's far more interesting than just comparing them on the surface level.
Yeah, I think just stating that both are RPGs isn't useful or interesting, but saying...
what he was trying to say is that D&D couldn't be a RPG because it didn't have any rules for role-playing. And that got a lot of OSR people like grabbing their pitchforks, you know?
Right. It's like, that's maybe not the best take.
See, I own Fake Chess, and that game is literally the RPG.
Fake chess. Yeah.
I was like, isn't there a chess role-playing game?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
If we want to talk about games that are GMs, to use that as a segue point, that game is literally a one-on-one game where both people just move chess pieces on a board, and it encourages you. There's like a little thing you have to do. You don't even have to know how to play chess. You just have to know how to move pieces on a board. and you can move them completely incorrectly, and it doesn't matter because the way you play the game. Also kind of competitive, which is also a really great like distinguishment of how RPGs can be very wild and different from one another. Because there's no GM, so there's nobody to oversee the thing, even though the game encourages you, like one of the optional materials to have is like a handful of people to watch and ooh and ah and react to you moving pieces around on the board. But none of those people are like given a role other than to just react. And
They're just
technically
the
speaking,
audience.
those people,
That's actually really cool.
And technically speaking, they're playing the game too. They're just not engaging with the mechanics when they play. And I just think that's a really great example because it can literally just be two people. It could be what's the fucking Pixar film, the dude that plays chess with himself. That's definitely not himself. It's somebody's game, and I can't remember his name. It's like Herman's Game or something like that. But he like playing a game over the dentures. You could do that with another person, using fake chess, and it's like, yeah, the game is just moving pieces on a board. There's no randomization elements. Yeah. Mo just pointed out that it's like it sounds like a LARP I've played. There's a fanfic for that.
I think so. On we mentioned GM-less games, so I think that bears a little bit of an explanation. Because the assumption that most people think when they think of Dungeons and like role-playing games is Dungeons and Dragons and the scenes from Stranger Things, right? Where there is like a DM a dungeon master who says what is in the world, and then the players who react to what the GM says, right? So GM-less games or co-op games are the GM's responsibility. There's no GM, and that responsibility is either handled by the rules themselves. So Ironsworn is a good example of this, where there are tables that you roll on to see what happens, or lists that you pick from to see what happens in the world, or games like Wanderhome, where the GM's responsibility is actually distributed out to the players, and instead of being a GM-less game, it's actually a GM-full game, because all of the players are taking on a slice of the GM role.
The game that Jeff, right? That Jeff's doing, the Weird Dungeon. That has a GM full mode. Like, you don't have to play that way, but you can. And I think that's I think moving more towards a democratized table where everybody at the table has equal say in like the overall narrative flow of the game. I think that's a thing that's becoming closer or more and more. I don't want to say a trend, but like something that's very much a direction that that we're moving towards in general,
Right.
which is I just described a trend, but
it's certainly an attractive quality to a lot of people that are playing now, especially those that have already been playing more like story game focused games, because you're not going to tend to see that in even though Weird is like kind of in that NSR, which is related to the OSR. It's the New School Revolution, which is just mostly people separating themselves from the garbage people in the OSR rather than a whole new genre in and of itself. That's just a debatable thing, but that's basically where it comes from. Just to explain to people who don't know. You could see that crossover of tables being more interested in, like you said, a democratized table. And I think that's a good way to describe the GM full experience. It's like if you feel like you are constantly taking input from your players on what's going on narratively, or like what action you should take, the GM full kind of style is a really great thing to look into and try, because you might find out that that's actually what you prefer to be doing in the first place. And then also that way you get to not have to do as much work. That's the other secret about GM full games, is that you get to be even more of a player as a result.
GM co-op games usually are set up where one person will be the facilitator, which is like the person who bought the book, right? So like,
dude, doesn't it always suck? Like sometimes I don't want to be the facilitator. Because I
it is
because I wanted to read it. Now I've got to do the thing. Oh,
Right, like yeah, and
DMs
then
on
that. So your job is to like teach the game and like lead by example, but not actually to control the game or direct the game, right?
Right. I think in those games, usually the facilitator doesn't actually have input on what happens in the game, right? Like they're
No,
guiding players through the choices that they're able to make, and then
exactly.
the players are
exactly.
in full control of the narrative, which is really
Right.
cool.
It's kind of like the same role that like maybe in more like traditional like play where you show up to like a convention. There we go. There's the word. You show up to a convention as the GM and you're about to run things and you have like handouts to hand the people, right? But it's just that. You just are
Right.
like, here's what you need to know to play this. Let's get playing now. Kind of
Yep.
thing.
When I'm running a co-op game or a GM-less game with people who have never done it before, I will take on a more active role just to like keep the story moving forward, but it's really like I'm doing that to model what is possible, and I'm always
You're being an
stepping
example of
back.
play, basically.
Exactly. I'm an example of play. So I might set a scene, and then kind of as to demonstrate how to set a scene, and then after that I'll say, okay, who wants to set the next scene, right? And share that responsibility.
There's a really great game that is like it's not it's definitely like GM-less, but it has like that facilitator kind of thing. I guess also this is the other thing is that these terms are kind of interchangeable at some point. It's very, very hard to distinguish when one is applicable and one isn't. I think unless you want to get really into weeds and stuff, which I would, but I don't want to do here. But there's a game that I really liked.
That's a different
Yeah,
stream.
exactly. There's a game I really like called "I'm Sorry, Did You Say Street Magic," which is the full name.
It's so good.
And it's a city building game that it says like it establishes the facilitator of the game, which is usually, it says in the book, is like typically the person who bought the game, read these rules and introduced it to their friends, basically, should be the one who goes first to demonstrate how to set up like a starting point for the others to play off of, but also to establish what a turn in the game looks like, so that when you pass it to the next person, they're not just going just staring at the paper and being like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's really cool and definitely something that is important in GM-less games like that, because like especially when you're new to RPGs, you're gonna come in and it's gonna be like, well, you can do anything, and you're not like, there's not a person that's limiting you in any way, and sometimes a limited option or limited number of options is easier because you can just look at them and pick one, rather than having the world in front of you.
Playbooks, they're great.
Playbooks are great.
So
if you forget what your character is like supposed to be doing, what their drama is,
Right.
playbooks and PBTA are like, here's the things that your character does that nobody else does, and you go, oh, well, I want to do one of those things so I can feel cool.
I mentioned frame a scene, and so I want to like in the vein of actually defining terms that we're using.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk for a minute about framing a scene, if that's okay. So framing a scene is kind of what it sounds like. It's usually the GM, but in more narrative games or games where all the players are contributing to the story. Everyone's always contributing to the story, but where everyone is contributing in kind of a writer's room mentality, any player can suggest to frame a scene, and it literally is just like, hey, I want to set a scene where I go to the king and ask the king for help defending my village from the raiders, right? And so the goal of this, or the point of this, is now you know who's there, where you are, and what you're trying to accomplish, and it skips all the boring stuff, right? So
There's
you don't have
another
to
thing
say,
that's in there that I don't know if you that I think has
Yes.
got to be part of that equation, and that's the stakes, right? Like, what's on the line?
yes, sorry,
you know?
yeah. What's on the? Do I get help? Sorry, yes, you're totally right. Do I
And
get
what's
help
going to happen
from
if
the
you
king?
don't get the
right?
help, right? Like,
Right,
or like
right.
all
My
of the bad
village will
things-
be overrun. Yeah. And so so now you have stakes of the scene. So that's totally right. So now the scene has like a consequence. It has weight. It has meaning.
Mhm.
You need to get the king's help, or something bad is going to happen. And you also skip, like, it lets you skip to the good stuff. So, without framing a scene, you might tell the GM, well, I'm going to leave my village and I'm going to walk to the city, and then I'm going to wait for an audition or an audience with the king. Right, and you might even play that out. You'd like spend time on the journey or walking through town, which can be fun. Like that is a good way to play. But if you want to cut past all of that, you can just say, "Hey, I'm going to go see the king," and then you briefly describe in a couple sentences the journey, and then cut to the important thing, which is asking for help. And then the flip side of framing a scene is hard framing. Right, so that is like soft framing, like, hey, I think I'm going to do this, and then you talk through it with the other players or with the GM, or the GM talks through it with the people involved. Hard framing might be the GM saying, you fall asleep that night, and you're awoken by raiders bashing down your door. They've already set your thatch roof alight. What do you do? Right, so hard framing is the GM taking an opportunity to cut directly to the action, tell you that something is going on, something is going wrong, and you need to do something about it now. That's my lecture is over.
Yeah,
Gosh,
so
I
I think-
was so entranced by listening to Victor.
I mean, it was a great
Sorry.
explanation. I really enjoyed it. I think one more thing we can talk about here is randomization mechanics. We've been talking a lot about dice, but we talked about chess one time, and there are more games that use chess, and there are also other things you can use to determine whether or not you're successful when you're not sure if you should be. But we can start with dice. So who wants to cover dice? I feel like Nerdy has a lot of thoughts about dice.
All right, cool. Dice are worthless. Never use them. They create the illusion of that there is randomization, because randomization isn't real. This is my soapbox. You gave it to me. You let me stand on it. No, actually, I think dice
I wasn't
are fine.
with you until randomization wasn't real. Now I'm like, all right, okay, I'm down.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. But what we think is random is not related to dice at all. It's like, anyways, yeah, exactly what Mo just said is chat. Dice leads to math, and I hate it. I don't hate math. I love math, but for other reasons. Dice are great. I think there's the basics of dice that we have in most games. Like the thing that a lot of these different genres that we've listed, because that's basically what they are, is like generalization of a certain archetypical play style, is that like they typically use dice, and I think if you ever get into RPGs, you're probably going to get into them through games that use dice, and they all kind of use them in the same way, where like you say I want to do something, and then you go, oh, I'm not. You and the GM aren't sure how that's going to come out, so then you turn to the conflict resolution mechanic, which is typically dice, and you pick up the dice, however many of them you need, and then you roll them and you look at them and you use that to then inform the narrative consequences of the action which you took. I know I just said a lot of words, but it basically broke down to, GM, I want to do this. The GM goes, I don't know how that would work. Okay, roll this for me, and then you go, okay, well, got us this. What does that look like? And then you continue.
Yeah, and I
that's
think
just the infinite loop.
if I can add on to the dice a little bit, because dice are the most common conflict resolution mechanic, there's just different ways of rolling them. They don't matter that much, but it does help you know what you're getting into.
Wait. I disagree completely. How you roll dice does matter.
I think that there are parts of it
because
that
there
matter.
are mathematical consequences.
Yeah,
of different
no, that's
types of
yeah. That is what I was gonna get into. When I said parts of it matter, is if if you're dealing with bell curve probability versus
so
linear
much
probability. Let me talk, Adam. I know what I'm talking about. Y'all made me headmistress. You have to listen to me.
Yes. No.
But yeah, like D&D, for example, would be defined as a D20 game, and then there are other games that like would be called D20 roll under, which just means that you want to roll low instead of high. A lot of games out there are D100. Usually you're not rolling a 100-sided die, you're rolling 2 10-sided die. But both of these are examples of what's called linear probability, where you're just rolling effectively one die. And so each result is equally likely that you could possibly roll. And then there are other games that use what are called dice pools, which just mean you're rolling more than one die, potentially a variable number, potentially a static number. But because you're rolling multiple dice, an interesting thing happens where the numbers in the middle of the full range are more common than the ones at the edges. And that is where dice gets important, that Adam is very animated about, so I'm going to let him talk about this.
Well, I mean, it just makes sense that like the numbers in the middle, they're in the middle. There's more ways to make those numbers with the dice that you've got, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's why it matters. Or central tendency is what that property is called, right? So
Mhm.
the larger the larger the sampling population, the more normalized it becomes, the greater the tendency towards this central number, the median, of the data set is going to be. And this is the nerdiest part of this whole conversation.
And that's saying
We could
something.
do
Yeah.
honestly we could do a whole like a whole show just on different dice mechanics. So I don't want to go too in depth, but
Oh, good. I will say there's another major type beyond those two, because there's rolling multiple dice, like creating a single dice pool, a dice pool that generates a single number. There's also dice pools where you count the successes, right? Or you're looking for one success out of that, or something like that, like in Blades in the Dark, where you're looking for the highest value you roll, or something like, again, Burning Wheel, where you're looking for all 4, 5s, and 6s. So there, even when you're using like different multiples, there's different ways to interpret those dice. The old Star Wars West End game, Star Wars D6 or D6 game, it was roll your dice. You're rolling a dice pool, you're adding it all together. I've always thought that you could just go ahead and kind of like just play
that game,
those Star Wars characters with Burning Wheel rules.
yeah, that game also importantly has another dice mechanic that we haven't talked about, which is called exploding dice.
Floating dice.
Which is when you roll the high, usually it's the highest number on a die, you get to roll that die again. Sometimes in some games that's without limit. So if you're rolling d6s, every time you roll a 6, you get to roll it again, and you're probably adding those results up. I believe the Kids On system also uses that exploding dice mechanic. Mo will correct me if that's not the case.
It does.
So
You're correct.
yeah. But yes, there are many dice pool systems out there, and many ways of rolling dice. And you'll find people defining, or when explaining a game, that's one of the first things they list, is how the dice work.
There's also, if you want to talk about games that use dice that aren't for the randomization elements necessarily, there's also a couple of games. One of them is mine. I don't know how many there are that also do this idea. I know there's one other because somebody mentioned it to me, and I was like, is it Icarus? Because that's the one that is really well known, where it is about stacking dice so that it gives you something to do with the dice physically that you can't do in a digital format yet, quite. It's kind of difficult to do in a digital format, I should say. It would be a different experience. But it has... oh my gosh, me too, Mo. I should stop reading chat while I'm talking. But I also want to play Icarus. I haven't played it yet. But I also have a game, to self-promo for a second, called Within a Storm of Silence that also uses dice stacking. But it is just like, if you just have a bunch of dice that you just want to roll and toss onto the table, and then pretend like you're waiting for your turn in a trad game. That's a great way to play the game, and it's all about trying to keep the dice from tumbling over, which segues into a very popular diceless system called Jenga, or not Jenga, sorry, called Dread, that uses the Jenga tower that you're probably familiar with if you have ever been to a white person's house. and they were like, we need something to do. Let's stack a bunch of wood blocks on top of each other and pull them out until they fall over. That is really good at generating that sense of dread that comes with a teetering tower that is on the course of falling over.
Yeah, and Dread isn't even the only. It's the biggest example of a
Yes.
a Jenga tower game, but it is certainly not the only one. Another one that comes to mind is Starcrossed, which is a 2-player game where you're playing
I didn't
two
know that
people.
used Jenga.
Yeah, you're playing two people who are in love but cannot be for whatever reason. And you either make it to the end of your story without the Jenga tower falling over, in which case you part ways, or the Jenga tower falls over and you embrace each other. Within the fiction. In real life, I guess that's up to you and who you're playing with, but consent is important.
Really
but yeah,
good
that
game
uses a
is-
Jenga tower. I believe I heard Horse Girl does as well, but Horse Girl
Oh my gosh, yes.
has a lot of Horse Girl has a lot of stuff going on, especially for a solo game, just mechanically. But it also has a whole lot of stuff in the content that game is dark.
It's
We
so
aren't
dark.
touching Horse Girl. Yeah, I'm not trying to sell you on
No.
Horse Girl.
I think the main selling point for using the Jenga tower as a mechanic for like resolution is that it's not really necessarily about the dread that it generates, but the core form of it is tension and
Yes.
peace. And like that whole, like when I mentioned like the teetering tower, you're like, ugh, you're like putting your nails to your teeth and chewing on them in a very cartoonish way. Don't do that for real though. And that can lend to a very interesting development as just laid out. There's also another like really I don't know how many people have heard of it, but also uses similar system. Uses the tower. It's called The Harm Is to the Body, which is about trying to which is based off of the I say poem, but it's not really a poem. It was like written as like, how do we transcribe warning future generations where language has evolved beyond our own, so that when they uncover toxic waste, they won't like not want to dig it out. How do we warn people to not go into this dangerous area, because we have a instinct as humans to want to pull toxic waste out, and this game is all about trying to like build a system to keep people from doing it. And the tower does that really well, of like the slowly falling apart of the language and like the further away you get from that language, the more your personal language evolves through time, the less likely you're going to be able to safely warn somebody of the oncoming dangers within your waste disposal. Oh, geez, somebody else talk, because I could talk about.
Yeah, let's talk about. You know what? Let's talk about cards. Cards are another.
Isn't there? Wait, is it? Do I? This is the Western game that uses poker hands, right? He
What?
says, holding up the game that he owns.
I'm like, I have not read that game. I can't tell you.
What is the name of it?
Dust Devils.
Dust Devils.
Oh yeah.
Yes,
I think
it does. It
I
uses
think-
it uses poker hands, which tells you how long it's been since I've pulled this game off the shelf and read it. But that is an option. Cards are an option, but I don't. All I know about them is that I own a game that uses it, so I'll let somebody else.
Yeah,
know.
I think one of the cool things about cards is like, obviously with dice you're just generating a number. Cards also have suits, and as you pull cards, there's fewer possibilities too, unless you're shuffling the deck every single time. But still, the probability there changes to be a math nerd about it, which makes it really interesting. And you could also do other interesting things like actually have a hand, as in a poker hand, but not necessarily that. Maybe you maybe for your action you get at least 2 cards, but if you're good at things you get more cards, and then you can show your highest 2, and then you can
also do
have
things.
yeah, you can have special things happen when like you're matching suits and things like that. I think it's really cool. I haven't played very many card-based RPGs. I've read a few, and every single one of them I've wanted to play.
I've thought about the design of them a lot, but I haven't gotten to play many of them. Like the Quiet Ears are really that uses a deck of cards in order to generate the progression of the seasons and that your culture is going through on the map that you're making or whatever. But also like the things that I've thought about in design concepts with cards. So I'm sure other people have made games that do this, and I know games that are similar. Is you're also not before my brain skips past the thing I was just gonna say and says something else. Hold on. Is that you can do things with cards that you can't really do in the same way with dice. Is like you could put a card face down. The facing of the card could matter, as in like what angle it's put at on the table and stuff like that. And like if you've ever played a collectible card game or a trading card game before, you can think of how those cards do interesting things, and you could apply that to a standard deck of cards. But then you could also get into exploring using custom cards. One of the games that I'm running right now is Paranoia Red Clearance, and it uses custom decks for it has one for actions that you deal out to the players, and they can use that as part of their initiative, and it has on the card what your initiative is, so you get to pick what your initiative is rather than randomly select what your initiative is from obviously a randomly collected hand. But then it means you have more choice over what you do, and the game also lets you play that face down, and you can lie. And this gets into like what Paranoia is kind of a pseudo competitive game. It's like in between cooperative and competitive, I think, where you can lie and say, oh, my initiative score, because it's like 1 to 10, my action order is a 9, and somebody else at the table could be like, can call you out on your bullshit, because you don't have to reveal the card to show that you have a 9, even to the GM, and the GM can't call you out, so you could just lie the entire time and always give yourself a really good score. And if another player says, hey, there's no way you have 3 8s. Like, there's no way you had 3 of those in your hand, and they call you out on it, they can get a bonus if they're correct, and because you'll lose your action. Uh-oh. Did I lose my internet connection?
No, we hear you.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, you're still there. Your image disappeared, but we can hear you, so that's the important part.
I think I just dropped for a second. Is it okay? Everything good?
Yeah, no, you're good. You're back.
Okay.
Or you're here.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But yeah, like you can use cards in that way to be like, not only to use initiative, but it can also be used to give yourself a special action. The cards, some of them have a thing called a reaction marker on them, so that you can use it in reaction to what the GM is saying, literally interrupting the GM describing something to be like, actually, there is a thing, and the card will tell you what you describe. It'll be like, there's something up high will be one of the cards, and you describe like an elevated terrain feature that is either beneficial to you or detrimental to somebody's action, which gets into like the competitiveness of Paranoia, where you could be like, this person is trying to fly through the air on their mutant wings, and you're going to be like, but actually a panel comes loose and swings down and smacks them in the face, or tries to smack them in the face if I use the reaction card. And so you can think of a ton of different ways that could be used in interesting ways. I wish I had more specific examples to present and how cards use. But it's also great for keeping track of information as well, because it'll be like, here are equipment cards, here are your mutation cards. Here
custom cards are great for that. Like, especially like getting random loot and things like that. I think that like ciphers and cipher system, stuff in Gamma World, which I believe you are also familiar with, Nerdy.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Gamma World's a great game.
Seventh edition specifically is the one we're referencing. It uses the 4th edition rules from D&D 4th edition in order to make game, but it uses a lot of cards for it, and you have your alpha mutations, and I think it's alpha mutations. It's either alpha mutations or omega mutations, and then alpha tech or omega tech, I can't remember. And as you use tech, you have to discard the card and draw more cards, because inevitably the tech will break down because you're in a post-apocalyptic future. And everything
it's really great. I think it's really cool. You can also, instead of regular cards or custom cards, have tarot cards, which one of the great things about tarot cards is the major arcana just being very, very evocative. A lot of games, I believe, will split up the major and minor arcana when doing the randomization for different things, which is really cool. I can't think of an actual specific mechanic off the top of my head, though, so if someone else knows, we can go ahead and take it away.
I have never played a tarot-based game.
All right.
I played RPG use cards, but never that there was the central, like, the
central
mechanic.
mechanic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can
I haven't played one either, but I know there's a name of one. So, but go ahead, Victor.
Oh, I was gonna say, can I switch to token-based resolution?
I was gonna lead us to tokens next. So
Awesome.
go ahead and talk about tokens.
So there's like token-based is you're usually accumulating and spending tokens, and this is usually instead of rolling dice at all. And so like the general structure is if something bad happens, you get tokens. If you want to do something good or impactful or meaningful, you spend tokens. My favorite version of this is in the belonging outside belonging, also sometimes called no dice, no masters genre of games, like Sleepaway, which is this one. And so the camp counselor, this is a game where you are defending children at a summer camp from an eldritch horror that lives in the woods. The camp counselor, if you want to gain tokens, you have to lie to a camper. They can tell it's a lie. Or tell a camper the harsh truth in a way that hurts them. So if you are mean to the children that you are supposed to be protecting, you get tokens. But then you can spend those tokens to take action and succeed on a camper's advice, or help a camper make a vital life choice, or simply get out of harm's way, right? So if you want to have a positive, meaningful impact on the story, the kind of stuff that would require a dice roll in a dice-based game, you instead spend a token to have that impact on the fiction, to have an impact on the narrative.
Yeah, I think what's cool about that is that it is, it takes away the perceived randomness. I'm being nice to Nerdy here. The perceived randomness. Like, the players are in full control of when they gain and when they spend tokens. Right. So if they want tokens, they could just do stuff to gain tokens, and then they can spend a whole bunch in a really big dramatic fashion.
Yeah, and it's very really cool. Much, it's great for players. This is going to sound bad. It's great for players who want to see their characters suffer, right? Like if you want to play a character, yeah, if you want to play a character who goes through hard times and who you as a player voluntarily have bad stuff happen to your character, then these games are great, because you can just say, I'm going to set a scene where this terrible thing happens and it's my fault and I'm a bad person, but I get a token out of it. So it's great.
Yeah. And I think that gives us a good pivot into another thing we haven't talked about yet, which is meta currencies, which are sort of a combination of tokens and dice. Right, so a lot of games use them. Fate, Savage Worlds, Cortex, of course.
I think a lot more games
Cortex Queen
than you think of, too. Because, like, even you could consider hit points a meta currency, right? Because I mean, you wager them on the outcome of a fight, right?
Mm-hmm. You just have less direct control over.
Yeah, you have less direct control. But if we're talking about fate points,
I think that a player is setting the stakes by putting themselves in danger. So they have a lot of control. But that's the old school guy in me coming out, right? Because if you don't, if you don't stand to gain, why would you put yourself at risk, right?
Right. Yeah. In Cortex, you have what are called distinctions, which are things about your character that could be positive or negative. Now, if you use them as a positive, they're a D8, and you add them to your die pool, and it's usually helpful because D8s are medium-sized dice in that game. If you use them negatively, it is a D4, which usually isn't helpful because it's the smallest die you can roll. And also, if you roll a 1, which, of course, as the smallest die, you have a higher chance of rolling a 1, something bad happens. But you do get a plot point. And plot points can be used to make relationships matter. It can be used to, like, find random objects. It can be used to activate special powers that you have depending on the game. I think fate points are also similar in that you can use them in order to just make something true in the fiction of the game. And you'll also see other things where it's like you get a temporary bonus for this roll, like you get to add extra dice, or a set number bonus, or you just get to re-roll it afterwards.
Yeah, in Paranoia Red Clearance, they actually have this. It's technically not a meta currency because Paranoia has like a lot baked into it, where the rules of the game are actually in-universe rules for your characters that they know. Like you know what your score in brains is, you know what your skill in guns is, so it makes sense that your character is like, no, I should be the one who's shooting this dude, not you. Give me the sniper rifle. Why are you trying to get the sniper rifle? I'm better at shooting. But it also they have this thing called Moxie, which has multiple uses, which are some of the ones that Penny just listed actually. Which is the main one is usually re-rolling your dice because the player gets a computer die result, and they don't want the computer to show up and ruin their day, and I mean help them, because they're selfish and they think they should have all the glory instead of letting computer help them. Those bastards, or because they got a lot of failures or not enough successes, and they're like, I think I could do better than that. But it can also be used to literally just give yourself extra dice to your roll so you can be better at doing a task. And then it can also be spent to activate mutations that you definitely don't have, and would never have, because obviously you would report yourself if you have mutations. So yeah.
All right. I think we're coming up about to where I wanted to end things, but if you guys have anything last minute to add, or if there's people in chat that have any questions, go right ahead.
Oh yeah, I actually want to talk about, like, since we touched on like fake chess, diceless games that don't even use don't even use tokens or anything like that. I think, yeah, like no randomization at all. There's no like or perceived randomization, because we could also apply perceived randomization to like the Jenga tower, because you don't actually have as much control as you think you do. It just feels like you have more control. Anyways,
Yeah, or like,
but.
Sorry, go
Go
for
ahead,
it.
Victor.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
For the queen is like, I guess there's randomization in For the Queen, but the gameplay is you pull from a deck of custom cards, and on that card is a question or a prompt, and then you just tell a story or set a scene based on that prompt, and then other people maybe jump in and contribute, and maybe you talk a little bit in character, or somebody else might say how they react to that scene, and then the next person draws a card, and you just keep doing that. Like, that's how the game is played. And in fact, you learn the game by drawing the first like 10 cards off the deck and reading them out loud. And so there's no task, there's no pass or fail, there's no tokens. You just say stuff, and it becomes true in universe.
Yeah, I know there are like I really wish I remembered the name of the game that I was thinking of, but there are some game. I'm sorry. Did you say Street Magic is a great example of a game that doesn't use randomization at all? It's literally just you make a decision. For instance, you either introduce a new landmark, you introduce a new neighborhood, or you introduce a new resident, and then you just describe who that is. You describe what that is with the help of other people at the table, but mostly it's yourself, and then adding notes to that thing, and then attaching it to the appropriate thing. So like a neighborhood isn't attached to anything except for the city as a whole, and then you have landmarks you attach to certain neighborhoods, and then you can have residents attached to certain landmarks, and then you have an event at the end of a round of play that you go through that somebody generates based off the person who decided what they wanted to focus on. And that's the entire thing. It's literally just you sitting around the table, writing things on cards, putting them down, and just talking. And there's no like, you don't have to spend a token. Like the closest you get to like a meta currency is that everybody gets one thing per turn that they make. And then once that round is done, you do the event, and then it moves on to the next person to decide what they want to focus on within the city. And you can and there's no technical endpoint to that game either. There's like no win condition, as you can see in like other games. It's literally just to sit around and create a city together and tell stories about that city and what's going on in that city. It ends when you decide to end it, basically.
Yeah, it's an example of what's like we usually call a world building game. I think Microscope is another popular example of that, which operates pretty similarly. And those are really nice because like if you're playing a game where it doesn't have setting building rules, but you want people to be very invested in the setting and knowledgeable about the setting, like just build it together. right? Then everyone's equally invested, everyone's equally knowledgeable because they were all there when it was built. So I like personally, I love playing games that way. Not everyone does. Some people want to be dropped into a world and then explore it, or to be dropped in front of a problem and then try to solve it. So
I think a lot of times there are folks who view the act of playing an RPG as an act of creation, right? Like we're making things, we're inventing things, and to me, that's a really rewarding style of play. Just simply experiencing something that someone else made up, to me, not interesting at all, you know. And I'm not saying it's an invalid play style. It's just it is a little more traditional, and unfortunately, I think like it's more hierarchical, and which is largely why I don't like it. You know,
I do think something that I like as a huge nerd who's in this live chat with other huge nerds being watched by nerds. Something that I have to constantly remind myself is we are the minority of tabletop role-playing gamers. The majority of tabletop role-playing gamers game once a week, and they don't think about the game in between sessions.
Unless they're the game master, right?
Unless they're the game master, right?
God.
And so I really think this is true. Like, I have friends who play Dungeons and Dragons, and I have pitched them other games, and they don't care because they're not there for the game. They're there to hang out with their friends, and D&D is the vehicle. Right?
Yeah, that is absolutely the majority. Like, before meeting a bunch of you nerds online, that's kind of how my group was. Now, I was running the games, so they would play whatever I wanted to run. But they're less invested in the settings and stuff. Most of them. Some of them would step up. Some of them would partake in the world building or declare more stuff in game, and others were there to, you know, make a few choices here and there. They were there more to consume what was happening.
It's the beer and pretzels role playing game, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, you show up and you chill with your friends for a few hours, then you go home, and maybe you got through a couple of rooms in the dungeon, maybe you just shit talked the entire time, right? And you had fun. Like most importantly, you had fun.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point. They are games, after all. We're here to have fun.
Wait, you guys are playing for fun?
You have to have the right kind of fun, Penny.
Oh, are you playing ranked competitive role playing games, Nerdy?
I'm sorry.
I had that
to this. I only win the game. I don't know what else to tell you.
Casual gaming implies the existence of ranked competitive gaming. That's all I'm saying.
That's true.
I was at GaryCon many years ago, and we were busy. We explained to this guy who was peripheral to our group, you know, the crazy shit we'd done in the off the books Dungeon Crawl Classics game the night before, and this guy, in all seriousness and earnestness, looks at us and says, "What do you guys just play these games for fun?"
As opposed to what? To win? Okay.
So hold on. This guy was a hero system guy. So maybe that will inform your opinions. I couldn't believe that I was being asked that. Like, it was one of those completely surreal moments in my life. The beer and pretzels crowd exists, right? Right. But I think that there's plenty of beer and pretzels people who are just beer and pretzels people now, right?
Yes, I think you're right.
Have to stay that way. I think that one of the best things that we as game runners can do, and I'm stealing Mo's term, is we can show people and what's possible, right? And help. I don't want to say like lead them to a promised better land or some shit like that, but I feel like people don't know what's possible, and it's not going to be the right fit for everybody. But I feel like there's a little bit of like an imperative that we bring it, right? So people can see what it is, you know?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people who are in the beer and pretzels crowd haven't really engaged with the mechanics of their game. They're there to hang out, like Victor said. They're there to hang out and play a game with their friends. But that doesn't mean that there's not a game out there that might click with their brain and they go, you know what? I can't stop thinking about this game.
Yeah,
I have a friend, or it's actually a friend's sibling, who runs Dungeons and Dragons, and they run only Dungeons and Dragons. But from talking to my friend, they run D&D like a narrative game, right? They run it like a Powered by the Apocalypse game. I sat down with them. The first non-Dungeons and Dragons game they played was Wanderhome, which is a like vibes-based game where you play cute animals and nothing bad happens. And they had so much fun. Like, they had a blast, and they got it instantly. This was like as far from D&D mechanically as you can get.
It is a
and they
fantasy
loved it.
setting, and that's the only thing they have in common.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, totally. There are people who are taking the mechanics of D&D and playing them how they want to play games, and there are games that do that already with less work.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone have anything else before we end things?
Play more games. Play lots of games.
Play more games.
Play every game.
Play all the games.
If you could,
Every game you can find. All of them.
If you could run some of those games for me too, that'd be great.
yeah, learn to run games.
Would really love
GMing,
that.
GMing is actually
I got a
really
list.
fun.
We should.
It's super easy,
We
too,
should
I
definitely. We should do one of these on like how to get into GMing. Because
I think we
GMing
should. Yeah.
GMing feels very intimidating. Like, you have to plan the whole adventure and you have to know the entire world and all of the rules. No, you don't. All of that.
How many of us? How many of us prep more
What
than a
is it
starting
like?
scenario that are in the stream right now?
Feel like. It's
I don't even write prep notes for my session. I make a radio show for one of my games that I'm in right now, and then I also use
Great.
I also use randomization elements to help me generate a briefing for the paranoia game. Otherwise, I'm just here's what you got to do, and then I just think of how that thing is slightly different from what is the truth of what they're told, and what is the
That's great.
actual truth.
I ran
kind of thing.
I ran Blades in the Dark, and my prep, it was a one-shot of Blades in the Dark.
I was in that game.
Which is like a spooky heist game in a steampunk city, and my prep was airships.
I almost blew up an
Just
airship.
one word. That's it.
Almost.
That's great.
It was airship. I was like,
One word.
And so I
Yeah.
was like, okay, there's an airship. It's basically it's an opulent airship like the Titanic, and it has come to town. It has come to your city. Let's play a game around this idea.
Yeah.
Right? And everything else was developed as we went. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah. We.
And
So I'm
if
gonna
you get
end
genre-
things here. So
Yeah.
why don't we go around and let people know where they can find you if they want to follow you. Adam, you went last before, so you can go first this time.
Yeah, pretty much just the only place to find me right now is TikTok, at DSR Adam. I'm pretty sure most of the folks watching this already know me there.
Probably.
Yeah, so that's really the only way to find me anywhere that I will pay attention to.
All right, Victor. Where can people
You
find
can
you?
find on TikTok, ThisIsVictor, and you can find me at ThisIsVictor.com, which links to all of my various things, including my itch page and my TikTok account.
All right, Nerdy. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on most places on the internet, except for the really bad ones, not including, except for Twitter. That one I'm still on for some reason. At NerdySimulation, or TheNerdySimulation. You can also find, I mentioned that I was a game designer, and I mentioned one of my games. You can find my games at imagination-simulations.itch.io. Hopefully that shows up in chat. I put it in chat in case anybody wants to look. You just copy that and put it in your browser. Put some games up there if you want to. Specifically, if you want to look at Within a Storm of Silence, the game that I mentioned about stacking dice. You probably own it if you are a supporter of the trans, so you should go download it. It makes people want to look at my game. But yeah, I'm very ephemeral when it comes to being online. I'm mostly on Discord, so if you're at a server with me, that's the easiest way to find me. But otherwise, yeah.
There you go. So you can find me at Penniless Roach on every platform, just about. I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok. I'm still on Mastodon, indiepocalypse.social instance, if anyone is using that.
Oh, that's a thing. I have that somewhere.
Probably. No one's using it.
Yeah.
I'm still there. I
Yeah,
check it
nobody.
once in a while. No one's using it. I do have an itch.io page. I only have one game up there. It's a one-page game called That Cake Was Out of This World. It requires no prep and just a handful of D6s. And, of course, if you're here, you've already found my YouTube channel. So, good job.
You did it.
But, yeah.
Hit
So
the
we're
subscribe
going to...
button. Hit like. You should do that.
Yeah,
Penny's
like and
amazing.
subscribe and all that stuff. We're going to pull the curtains here.
Cut
All
the
right.
feed.
Well, good night, everyone.